Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven, and it is our 100th episode. For those of you who have listened to all 100, thank you so much for doing that. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We thought that it'd be a good time for us to answer a question that we often ask people who we interview. What do you want to do in the next 5 to 10 years as a business? So on the 100th episode, today, right now, we're going to be answering that question and also discussing a little bit of drama that's been happening in the tabletop community. So stick around. All right, Zach, we're here. We're in the episode.
We had a kind of a pre-episode during the speed-up
pre-episode. We kind of had a warm-up. So welcome, everybody. This is the 100th episode. This is, I guess, technically a big deal. It feels like a big deal going from 2 digits to 3.
I don't know, though. I mean, there's no air horn.
we have not. We lost at least one listener from the air horn.
Yeah, there was someone like, I've been listening 80 episodes in, loving it. Air horn came out. See you later.
1 star.
1 star.
That was a 1-star review.
Permanently.
Yeah.
I mean, that's unfortunate, but I love the air horn. I'm going to be honest. It's kind of a cultural thing around here at Covenant. I don't know why. I think it's probably Robert that started that.
We all, Jonathan and I are kind of steeped in the London music culture and drum and bass and jungle, and that kind of, started us down that path. But welcome, everyone. Officially 100th episode. You are here. We are here. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for watching. This is a good time to maybe have a quick reminder that I guess 100 episodes in is probably a pretty good indicator of what you think about the cast in terms of quality and enjoyment.
If you're still here, yeah.
We really appreciate it if you review the cast on iTunes, especially. That helps us out, and if nothing else, it gives us a lot of feedback as to what we might do better and how we might improve. So consider this an invitation to 100 episodes in. Let us and iTunes and the world know how you like this podcast. And then moving on to what we're going to get into today, whenever we were doing the GAM interviews and a lot of the older interviews that we've done with board game publishers specifically, and then ANA and Asmodee and FFG folks, it's kind of what's the vision for the next 5 to 10 years? Where can you expect to go? What can we as fans of yours anticipate happening? And we've never really answered that question directly for ourselves. So we're going to flip the script around a little bit and do that. And I guess we haven't, as we like to do with the podcast, we haven't scripted anything out. We haven't had any real serious preliminary conversation about what that's going to be. So it'll be a kind of a candid look at us talking about that on the fly.
Well, and I think, we used to, if you've been watching the show since the beginning, we used to do this thing where before the episode, we would have a conversation to kind of outline what is it we wanted to talk about, how do we want the discussion to go. And then after a while, we started realizing that the discussion we were having before the podcast was much more interesting than the discussion we would have on the podcast.
True.
And so that's what's going to happen here. And so obviously I think Steven and I, as 2 key stakeholders at Covenant, have an idea of where Covenant's going. But I also think there's some interesting parts of the conversation where it's not just, I think particularly an organization of our size, we're not huge, it's very difficult for us to predict exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
So I have notes of things that I want to talk about, but I'm curious as what you're going to say as well, because for me, there's a lot of essentially here's how I see the industry going, and here's the role I would like to see us play in it. Mm-hmm. And it's probably less granular than in 5 years, this thing is going to happen.
Well, and I think that's necessary. Any reasonable projection at that amount of time is going to be mainly a kind of an overarching values and kind of vision statement more than it is going to be here are the specifics, right? It's going to be very hard to do specifics in 5-10 years.
And just to give you some, obviously we were newer at the time and younger and more naive and didn't know what was going on.
Didn't know what you're talking about.
The reality is 10 years ago right now so the company is a little 12 years old in January, this past January, so it's a little over 12. So you got hired almost 10 years ago.
Right.
Officially. You were involved from the very beginning, but officially first person.
It was our first real paycheck, right?
Yeah, if you call it that.
Cut by the company.
It was money going from the company to your account in some small amount. But if I think about back to that point, right? That whole fall period, right, where you took over all the shipping and the customer service and all that kind of stuff. If at that moment we had sat down and said,
Yeah.
Where's Covenant going to be in 10 years?
Yeah.
I think it ended up a lot different than we expected.
Definitely.
Like,
I don't even know that we had a local store in mind at that point. We kind of had it as a dream project, but I don't know that it would have been in the plan.
I think at that point it was very. I remember a meeting like a year before that where it was like, because again, our mantra up front was do everything better.
Yes.
Like everything in this industry is not as good as it should be, and we can do it better.
That's a big task.
Yeah, we called it Gaming Reborn, right? But then over time, I think we grew up a little bit, right? We also went from like roughly 18, 19, 20 to like 30. And I think that's an important...
You're talking about our ages?
Our age, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That's an important perspective shift that happens.
Yeah,
But,
it changes a lot of things.
Yeah, just even the store, it's like, so the store was one of the many things on the list that we wanted to do better.
Well, we also at that point very much wanted to be the ESPN of tabletop gaming. And I would say that was Jonathan's initiative mainly, and we had done the Monpog tutorial, I think, at that point, which was our first real big one, and Dragon Ball CCG we had done.
Yep.
And then we started, I think we were recording or in the process of recording our first Monster Apocalypse Finals at Gen Con.
So I think our first Monpog finals at Gen, I don't know why I remember this stuff.
You got it. You've got it. Like, I can't remember anything.
Would have been, so the first Gen Con we went to was 07. So I started the company in January of 07, worked together that summer, building stuff. At the end of that summer, we went to Gen Con, played Spoils the whole time.
Yeah.
We skipped the next year, which is 2008, when Monpog came out. That was the only Gen Con I haven't been to since then.
Right.
Same for you.
So 09?
Then 9 is the first year we took Jonathan.
Yeah.
Who had been doing some projects for us on the side, the tutorials and stuff.
I think we recorded that game on the camcorder.
100%.
The old Canon had in 10-minute segments, but that was the first time we'd done commentary on games, and we kind of done that thing. And at that point, the ESPN of games was, in a lot of ways, the mantra of the content. That has shifted so much. I mean, it's as literal a 180 as we could have done.
Yeah, I mean, besides just not
side.
doing content anymore.
I suppose.
But like, if you're going to keep creating content, the angle, and I think that's very reflective of what I would expect over the next decade.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, I would never have predicted that perspective shift away from essentially, right, like super competitive focused coverage of games into, because that content is inherently for the people that are steeped in those games the most, right?
Which we were at the time.
Which we definitely were, which makes
content
sense.
For us.
And a lot of people have done and continue doing that kind of content. But the 180 is that we went to the complete opposite side of the spectrum and said, actually, like, the most difficult, most confusing part that no one's really paying attention to is when you first get interested in a game, where do you go from there?
Yep.
And how do you get to the point where you could actually show up to your local store and play in games or meet up or whatever is going on?
And the other piece of that, too, and this was reflected in the retail shift that's happened this past month, is so much of it is, looking at the content landscape, so much of it is about how to, again, playing into the ESPN type theme, how to be the best of this, the best cards, the best decks, how to win in this tournament, and what you should know, how to play better, all this kind of stuff. And we're, in our current lives, more interested in, like, how can we have the most fun, right? And that definitely changes. If you're going to make content based on that principle, how is that then, adapted from here are the best cards in this unboxing to here is how to have a great time with a robot deck, something like that. So that also has shifted, and so we've seen a lot of that turbulence, and it's exciting to project into the next 10 years, which we'll do. But first, let's talk about Wingspan, shall we? We got some big news on Wingspan.
We do.
We've been, those of you who have been following us on Instagram, when we were heading out to Adepticon, we stopped in St. Louis, had a chat with Jamie Stonemaier from Stonemaier Games, and had some great coffee. Had the sidecar, which I'd never seen before, is amazing.
It was impressive.
$3. I mean, the value.
Do you remember the name of that place?
Caldi's. Yeah, it's a St. Louis, I think,
specialty
spot. But you get a single shot cappuccino, a shot of espresso on the side, and 2 chocolate covered espresso beans for $3. I couldn't believe it. It was unreal.
The cost to value ratio is exactly what you were looking for.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I literally was like, I
was jealous.
So we had a good chat with Jamie. I just talked about all sorts of stuff, just industry and lives and kind of who you are, who we are, and got to know each other. And that's kind of culminated into, a working relationship as well. And so we were able to get a number of copies of Wingspan that we are now pre-ordering on our website. So we have some available. It looks like those are going to ship out around July, according to what we know. And it is right now one of the best ways, if not the best way, to lock down a copy of this game if you want it. We've worked really, really hard to guarantee as best we can the supply on this thing. And we've got some for sale. You can get your pre-orders in now. Obviously, whenever they're gone, they're gone. I don't know that we'll ever get any more. So now is the time.
Well,
we're so stoked to get this opportunity.
I think for people listening that may not be as familiar with Stonemaier, just a quick...
Who? How?
Yeah, I mean...
You can't throw a rock in tabletop gaming without hitting Jamie.
I think if you're not super... yeah, that's right. If you're not super familiar with board games, maybe. But the short version is that, and just Wingspan, the story, we reference this game so much in our content, particularly from Gamma and recent podcasts and stuff. And the reason it's notable is because, like last week, we talked about allocation. And it hit on this same chord, but it was just a much bigger example because I think board games are such a widely popular thing. But essentially, Stonemaier is known for making games that do very well. They don't do a ton of games every year, but they do a couple. And Wingspan is a game that was designed by, what is the art of bird watching? There's a term for it. Aviary? No. I don't know what it is. I'm out of my element here. Jonathan's looking it up for us. I don't know. Anyways, so
the art it's by Elizabeth Hargrave.
Yeah, there's a game where you literally are bird watching.
Yeah.
Is the kind of idea, and it got announced late last year. It came out, and from everything we heard at Gamma when we were there with a bunch of retailers, most retailers got 5 to 10% of what they wanted of this game. It immediately sold out. Another print run was coming. They got again allocation. They're only getting 5 to 10% of the game. Been immensely popular, and there's been some various things along the way in terms of somehow Amazon ended up with a number of copies, and that created some drama. So there were a lot of elements to it, but it's essentially,
or we should say, copies ended up on Amazon.
That's what. Yeah, they ended up there, not necessarily.
However, they were being sold by Amazon.
However that goes.
They try to, and Amazon obfuscates that as much as possible. I think that's a fair thing to say. Like, is this a third-party seller? Is this a marketplace thing? Is this an Amazon? Are we fulfilling it by Amazon through a third party? So, it's fair that there's confusion there. And I think Amazon wants it that way.
Yeah.
They're not interested in you knowing the supply.
And so, what happened there as well, so there's a group that does part of their distribution through Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they buy it and they sell it through Amazon or whatever. And they apparently, from everything I read online, prepaid for a run of this game after it was difficult to find, and that showed up on Amazon. And then obviously retailers who had only gotten one copy when they ordered 20 see people buying it over on Amazon, and that's frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
But right now there's as far as I'm aware, right now there's a distribution starting to get some, and that's going out. And the stuff we're pre-selling is not a part of that. There's another run coming, like you said, around July, and that's what we've kind of worked with Jamie to lock in a certain amount of supply to be able to sell. So if you're having trouble getting this game, you can guarantee you get it by pre-ordering on the store. We also put a subscription up.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that for sure. So we're not sure. Judging by precedent, we assume that there will be expansions for Wingspan. And it's a game that is built to have that happen. If you've looked at it, you played it, it would be very easy to expand this in meaningful ways. So we went ahead and put up a Wingspan expansion subscription. And what this is, we don't know what the price of these expansions are going to be. We honestly don't even know if they're going to happen. But what we're just kind of getting prepared for is in the event that they do happen, if you're signed up for that subscription, we'll just send you every expansion for Wingspan as soon as it comes out. Those things usually hit your doorstep by release, if not maybe one day after, but 90%, in the continental US. 90% is on release day, so we've gotten really, really good at shipping them appropriately so that they arrive right on time. And then we're going to do 25% off MSRP no matter what the price ends up being. And then it'll be shipped with the lowest cost USPS method, whether that's first class or priority, based on the ultimate weight of the expansions. So it's kind of a preliminary. If you love Wingspan and you don't want to deal with, we can only imagine that if thousands and thousands of these copies sold out instantly, that the moment an expansion comes out, the same kind of thing is likely going to happen, kind of the run on the bank, as it were.
What we've seen from what I was reading earlier on Facebook is that they've currently sold over 30,000 copies at retail.
That's insane. That's a big run.
Crazy.
That's a lot.
Right? So that's where, if you that's part of why we made the subscription. It's like if you just want to sign up and not deal with it,
Yeah.
you can just sign up, and then you can always cancel too. So if you actually get the game and you're like, this isn't what I want, I don't think with how far behind they seem to be on making the core game, that any kind of expansion is going to show up in the near future.
Sure.
So you can kind of pre-order it, sign up, and then if you don't like the game, cancel it. And then if you do, you just let it roll, and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right on. And we've got a limited number of slots on that subscription. So
Yeah,
if it's
because
something
supply reasons.
Because supply reasons, right? We're only comfortable guaranteeing a certain amount. So if you're really into it, sign up for that. It's free to sign up, and then boom, you get all the expansions. That's going to be a really, really fun time seeing how this game expands.
Yeah.
And it's kind of our entry into the board game market in a lot of ways, right? Like
Yeah.
we've dabbled in board games before, but there's a lot of innovation yet to happen here, especially on the retail side. And so, like this idea of a subscription, you start to bridge the gap. What is an expandable card game? What is a living card game? What is an expandable miniatures game? What is an expandable board game? And why or how are they different? And you start to look at a game like Wingspan, and it's like, well, let's say it releases an expansion, who knows, every quarter or every 2 times a year, let's say, like standard kind of board game expansion. That's reasonable. Like that's as much as a Keyforge set is coming out.
Sure.
So why not treat it with a subscription and give it the full treatment? So that's what's going on from us on Wingspan. We're super amped to be able to offer this. This is a long process that has led to this. So hopefully you guys will take advantage. And then on that note, it's worth noting that there's a kind of another Stonemaier related news piece that we've been following a little bit on Facebook, where all great just deep, meaningful discussion happens. The platform that is known for...
Is that a little /S? A little sarcasm thread there. Yeah, I mean, so the thing is...
So we're tracking
and this is something we do. We did an episode about the Dark Souls Kickstarter when we were starting to talk with Steamforged and about God Tier and stuff. Because, you know, when we work with someone, we want to make sure that it's someone we want to work with, that they kind of have a same perspective on us, on the industry and how they operate and stuff. So anytime you see, like we were, you know, in the process of announcing this Wingspan stuff that we just talked about. And so they announced a policy, which created a big discussion.
And that was like yesterday,
industry,
right?
Yeah, it was very recently.
It's like, ooh.
And essentially, if I had to boil it down, you can find it on his website. But the policy essentially is, you know, if you are making false claims or spreading wrongful information or that kind of stuff about Stonemaier and their products, that Stonemaier's not going to sell you their games anymore, kind of a
Sure.
thing. And that brought up all kinds of questions, right?
Do you want to test it right now? Let's just say some really nasty stuff about
See if
Jamie
we
and see if
immediately
we
get kicked out. Nah, I'd rather not test that. And so, you know, the reality of this, and this comes back to last week, towards the end of the show, the question I ended up asking was, what's the responsibility, or it wasn't responsibility, what's the...
between a publisher and a retailer.
Yeah, it's like what does a publisher owe to a retailer and vice versa? What's the responsibility to each other, I guess?
Because it is a relationship.
Sure, and I think, you know, it's easy to forget, and you get stuck in these kind of like historical patterns of essentially most publishers, right, are giving a 40 to 60% discount on their product to retailers in order for the retailers to do what it is the retailers do.
Yeah.
And I think in the 90s, right, and that's what I remember because I was a kid during the 90s, the retailer had a tremendous value even just in stocking the product and having it on their shelf and as a place where I could walk in and buy it, because in 95, most people couldn't just hop online and buy something, right?
And to be clear on this, publishers had no real other way of selling that product at all. Like you said, customers can't find it online. The best that a publisher could do is go to like conventions and sell it direct.
Sure, and I think and they've been doing that forever.
Yeah.
But I think I remember even on the back of the old like Pokemon TCG packs, where it was like you can call this number, and like we'll do a mail order if you want to like.
Oh, nice.
You know, old school, like if you can't get this kind of
Send
a thing.
us a check, cashier's check.
And so, you know, as things have evolved, and this will play into our 10-year discussion a bit as well. The truth of the matter is, this is why we've seen Kickstarter do so well, right? Where publishers sell directly to consumers. We've even seen a lot of publishers who are selling a lot more direct. And this was another hot point with Wingspan, when obviously, like, if you're a retailer and you had 25 customers ready to buy this product and you only get one, you feel like you missed out on 24 sales.
Right.
Which is correct. You did miss out on that.
Right.
But then when simultaneously someone like Stonemaier is selling copies of their game directly to customers, you know, I think it's easy for retailers to feel like they kind of took those sales from them.
Sure.
Right? And we'll dive into that in a second. But in the 90s, it's like there's a tremendous value in just selling the product, like we've kind of established. But today, right, it's like if a publisher is good at marketing and has a following and has customers who are following them, there's a lot less value. And we've been dealing with this on all our local discussions for the past year on the podcast. There's so much less value in actually just selling the product.
Yes.
And there are a number, we talked to a few at Gamma, of retailers who are very good at board games in particular. They have a lot of rotating like demo copies that are available where all their staff know how to teach all these games. And so, if you can walk into a local store and they have a copy of Wingspan that they'll teach you and they'll onboard you, and then they have a copy you can buy immediately, there's a lot of value on the retail level from that, right? But when you come back to something like Wingspan, I think this actually demonstrates something very powerful and it's just a problem that's going to happen. And we're going to figure it out as an industry, right? Because retailers right now have no way, really, of basically guaranteeing supply because the system's not built for them to put in orders early enough for Stonemaier to print enough to get it to distribution, to get it to them. And the distributors aren't, obviously, because I was even reading, like, essentially, Stonemaier allowing distributors to come in and say, you can prepay and pre-order a run of this, and you'll get it. 100% get it, right? And they didn't do that, right?
See, I hope that I want to dive fully into that.
Yeah, so retailers don't have a way of
please.
guaranteeing it. Distributors aren't.
They have a way, but they're not willing to put the money down.
They're not willing to do it, right?
Yeah.
And technically they could. Even if they didn't want to take risks, they got to have a system where retailers have to prepay.
Sure.
Like, whatever you're willing to prepay, we will get
if
you.
If retailers aren't willing to do it, they can make customers prepay.
It all goes down to the customer, right?
And if customers aren't willing to prepay, then you won't get your goods.
But, again, the customer will get the product.
Right.
One way or another.
Right, that is true.
So if the retailer wants to make money, they have to be willing to take the risk, right? But essentially, right, Stonemaier creates a game, creates a market. On launch day, they had an article in the New York Times, right?
Right.
And so what happens, though, is that I think there's this, like, both based on tradition and based on what's going on, it's like I picture a retailer, right? It's like if we have 30 customers ready to buy Wingspan locally, and we've built this audience of board game players, and they're wanting to buy it from us, and then we can't get it to them, right? So it's this feeling that, like, well, this customer that I keep engaged and keep in the hobby and offer all these services to is going to buy directly from you. And there may be truth in that, right? But
yeah, there's some amount of truth in that.
I also understand that with Wingspan in particular, right? Probably, if I had to take a bet on it, right? 90% of the demand for Wingspan was not generated by the local retailers.
Right.
Us, any of the other thousands of retailers in the country. And so then you have to ask the question, right? It's like, does the publisher owe it to the retailer to send all of those units down the chain?
Mm-hmm.
Or if they're capable of building the excitement, building the hype, building the awareness, should they just be selling directly to the customer?
Right. It's a question they'll have to ask, right? And remember, to do this, to supply, rather than direct, to supply it through the chain, you're looking at making about half the money you would normally make on this product. So the value has to be tremendous because you were losing half of the cash.
You could literally, if not going through the chain meant half the sales, you would make just as much money.
You make just as much money, and that's worth noting. So going back to your example of somebody is, let's say they have 25 people who have come in and said, I want Wingspan. Can you get it for me? And they say, I will pre-order it. I will try my best. And they only get that one copy. If they had created all of the demand to sell 25 copies of this thing, and then they were shorted to 24 copies gone, right? So they only got the one copy. That makes a lot of sense, right? Where there is a mismatch there, and you either need to make sure that somebody like a Stonemaier Games understands that you have, by your efforts, created 25 customers, not just for Wingspan, but for his board games and other board games in the future. You need to make that relationship clear, if that's what you're doing. Or you need to understand the reality of, if people are coming into your store because you're a board game store and they want to get a board game they already know everything about, and all they're looking for is for you to take their money and you to give them a box, you didn't earn that. So the only way that you can make the argument that you are owed that is if you directly earned it on that transaction, or if you have started from somebody who had never played board games before, got them interested in the hobby, kept them interested in the hobby for years to where they're now interested in buying Wingspan. And you need to be able to quantify that. I think speak to that in a holistic way when you have a conversation with a publisher. Now, here's the other problem. And this is nobody's talking about this, and I didn't quite fully appreciate that whenever I was thinking through this.
I feel like you had a light bulb go off when I was going through my example.
So the light bulb is the role of distribution in all of this is to satisfy their customers, which are retailers. So if I'm a retailer and I need 25 copies of Wingspan and distribution is only getting me 1, they need to stop passing the buck up to Stonemaier, and they need to say, the reason you're not getting these copies is because we didn't order enough, or we weren't able to order enough because we weren't going to take that amount of risk, right?
Yeah, because as far as I know, right, it reminds me of the Ultimate Guard backpack, where the idea of a birdwatching game, right, I think the initial reception at distribution was, I'm not sure they're going to want this, right?
Yeah.
And then it goes crazy.
Right.
But I do, that's exactly it. It's like, and I get it, the struggle is that last year alone, there's over 4,000 board games that came out. So distributors can't make that bet on 4,000 games, right?
Right.
But they also, again, as the client, the retailer, you should be working with the distributors that most consistently get you what you're after.
But let's just look at a real example of, as Jamie mentioned in this Facebook thread, I think it's Flat River is what they call it, Flat River Distribution. They didn't have this working up front. It was, oh my gosh, Wingspan is a hit. Clearly, it sold out immediately. I'm on the phone right now talking to Stonemaier, getting however many, 5,000 to that. I don't know what the print run was.
Pre-buying
They're saying,
entire
we
run of
will
this
pay
game.
for 10,000 right now. Will you print it? And Jamie says, okay, here's one option I could do. Or we have the other side, which is which of the distributors pushing out to retail stores are saying the same thing?
Yeah, and as far as I know, right, there are, at that point, distributors are talking differently about the game, and that's why we've since, so I think there's been 2 print runs since then. There's one going out to distributors right now, literally. There's the Amazon, Flat River, whatever relationship thing happening. And then there's even in July, right, we have another print run coming. And so, like, they're making it as fast as they probably can.
Right.
But then you look at it, you go all the way back to the root of this, and it's like, Stonemaier had to prepay and pre-buy and produce and pre-design and do all the legwork on this game, right? And so then if they have, I think in one of his blogs he talked about having 10,000 copies initially, and he sold about half directly, is what the math ended up boiling down to. But it's like, is the fact that you got allocated so hard by distribution, right, as a retailer, on him or distribution?
Why didn't they order more?
Because
it's that simple.
In my mind, it's like whatever distribution told him they were buying, like I don't think they didn't get whatever they asked for, right? And so then the problem comes in, it's the whole system we've been talking about for months, which is retailers don't have to commit to a product till 2 weeks out. Distributors don't have to commit to a product till 3 or 4 weeks out. Print runs take 2 or 3 months at least. So distributors are putting in their final numbers after that point, right? And it's like if they tell me they need 20,000 copies 2 weeks out, sorry.
It was too late.
Yeah.
I mean, so the way that this is solved is one of the distributors that's going to retail, let's say Alliance or PhD or one of these that's in the space, and we know they're pushing out to retail stores. Let's just say Alliance, because that's the big one that everybody kind of probably knows about. If Alliance had, let's say 8 months before Wingspan hits the shelves, said, we believe in this game, we want 20,000 copies right now, they would have wrecked, right? They would have dominated, and all the retail stores would have been super happy because they would have got all the copies that they wanted. Now, after you have the sellout, if you have two decision points for Jamie, let's say, I've got somebody who's willing to pay right now for 10,000 copies and do a print run for just them, and I have Alliance who's willing to pay for 10,000 copies through just them. He can then make that choice between like, well, do I want these that are maybe likely to be pushed out to Amazon and online retailers, or do I want to push them out to Alliance that's going to go local? Which one is the higher value for the long tail of Wingspan and my organization and my brand? That's at least a decision. But what I don't think that decision actually exists, because I do not think that there are actual retail or distributors who are willing to go to somebody like Stonemaier and say, we want 10,000 right now. Press the button.
And it's also the kind of reality of like, if this group comes to you, right, the Amazon, Flat River, whatever group, and they want to buy 50,000 copies, and all the distributors in tabletop come to you, and combined they want to buy 15,000.
Right.
Do you want a guaranteed 50,000? Like, how can you expect anything else, especially when, and I get there's a long tail to this, right? And that's why, like, supporting the retailer ecosystem, right? Having 3, 4, 5,000 stores that'll consistently buy your product and promote it and sell it is a benefit.
Yes.
No doubts. But the other thing that's a little weird for me is when it comes to expandable games that need communities, the games we tend to work with, right? LCGs, miniature game, collectible card games,
Right.
that kind of stuff. They're so much more valuable.
The retail
The
environment.
retailer,
Yeah.
just having the space to have the events. But I think about Wingspan, and I put some serious money on the average player playing this at the kitchen table.
Yes.
And so they're not even playing it at the store.
Right.
So you have to wonder, as a board game publisher, right, what is the actual value that's being added there? And it's like, if someone comes up to you and wants to buy 20,000 copies of a game,
Right.
and will pay for it right now, what do you say? I mean, and the flip side of this too is like the fact that any amount is going to distribution currently.
Yeah.
It's like, could he just keep selling this directly on his website, making 100%?
I mean, if you're sold out everywhere, the best place to move those is direct.
So like,
It's already kind of a charity project in a lot of ways. I mean,
he's got to balance it, right? Because it's like
or not charity, but like he's obviously demonstrating that there is value in not taking all of the cash and spreading it out
100%.
into a system that is benefiting board games and Stonemaier in general.
And I think the thing that I appreciate most about Stonemaier / Jamie, who runs it, is his insane level of transparency.
Yes.
So the amount of information we have to discuss this, as compared to any other time this has ever happened with any other publisher or product we've been talking about, is immensely higher, right? He's not trying, from what I can read into it, right, he's not trying to sleight of hand anybody or really take away a bunch of value that if someone else had invested a bunch of energy in this game and then doesn't get any supply. But it's literally like, this game is in way more demand than we can possibly handle, and we're printing as much of this as we can. But as a business, you have to make the decisions, right, that are the best for you. And I think the best decision is somewhere in the middle, where he does continue supplying normal supply. You know, right? A certain amount of every run is going to go through standard distribution, and he'll keep getting his game out there, and he'll keep satisfying retailers who hopefully continue wanting to sell his products. And the other part of this too is like, it's the truth of it is pretty much every game he's put out has been a hit.
Yeah.
And no retailer, I mean, he's continuing to sell a lot of these games, right? And so like, at the end of the day, even if he sold the first 80,000 copies direct, right? If there's a 500,000 demand over the next 5 years, and it's going to happen through retailers, it's like, are you not going to stock?
Right. You can make that. You can make that call if you, just like how the policy that was laid out is like, if you're lying and being defamatory essentially about Stonemaier games, I'm not going to sell to you anymore. You can not sell Stonemaier games. I mean, that's fine. But here's the thing that you need to realize as a retailer, and this is why you have to really understand value, is like, is anyone going to notice at Stonemaier that you stopped selling Wingspan? And if the answer is no, then where's the value that you're providing? I mean, that's the most raw, basic answer that you can give to any of these kinds of situations. You can protest it all that you want. Yeah. But like, if nobody's going to notice, then it means that you're not actively providing hardly any value. So why should Jamie care that you're not stocking his game? And I think it comes down to modern retail, modern existence in a market that we have that's so wide open and that's so online available and shipping worldwide and all of that. It's all about value. And the first place you can add value is by giving financial incentive to the people who have the product. So if I can go up to Jamie and say I can pay for $20,000 right now, that's value for him. Right? That's the easiest way to do it.
I'm pretty sure that's value to any publisher.
Right. Now, if you can't do that, then you have to find a number of other ways that value can be added by you and only you to gain an advantage so that is seen as worth essentially repaying or paying for. And if you're not doing that, then it's like, this is going to keep happening, right? Sure. This is not going away. And transitioning that into the kind of 5 to 10 year covenant plan, I think is very relevant because this is the view that we've had and many retailers have had for years now, of understanding that this chain is breaking down. It is not what it was whenever a lot of people started their retail stores in the late 90s, early 2000s, particularly off the back of Magic the Gathering.
Well, it's also just the reality of, I think the chain is still fine, but you can't expect to get disproportionate value for not doing anything. Like,
right.
And that's where it kind of loops around to me, because like I think the chain, like I said, 4,000 stores buying 2 copies of a board game means you can print that game.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a runaway success. It doesn't have to be immediately sold out for 5 years, right? It's literally just the strength of the retailers is in their numbers.
Sure.
But individually, it's irrelevant, right?
Right.
So as long as 90% of your retailers don't care and they're going to keep stocking Wingspan as long as they can keep getting copies.
But also the strength of retailers being in their numbers allows distribution to exist at all. So like the strength of retailers is that you essentially have a giant entity that can compete with anybody else in terms of financial value and buy a whole lot of copies up front that are then going to serve this, giant voluminous base down here. And if that isn't happening, if the distributors aren't willing to buy in the volume that's going to satisfy their retailers, then you don't have the advantage that you need. And you're going to get beat by the Flat Rivers and the Kickstarters and all of the people who are willing to put 20 to 50,000 copies on the line right now. So either distribution needs to get in the game, as it were, and compete extremely hard on these points if they can. I don't know if they're capable of doing that just in terms of margin and risk and
well, I think that's
making
another
mistakes.
Part of the mathematical problem, because if you have a $10 product, everything I've understood about the industry is distributors are working somewhere between 5 and 10% margin.
Yeah, and maybe it's not enough.
So if you have a 10% margin even, you're making $1 out of every $10, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the amount of risk you take by pre-buying, because you're paying 40% cost.
Yeah.
So you need to sell 4 times.
Yeah.
Unless their margins got better. And that's the other part is, right now, if there was a distributor charging 70% of MSRP to retailers, but they had Wingspan,
yeah, that's true.
they might clean up.
That's true, actually. Yeah, and that's a good.
Because if they're taking more of the risk, they should inherently get more of the value out of it.
Yeah, and you have to stare this in the face, and this is even just 5 years from now, you've got to stare this in the face, and we're staring it in the face every day. Is that it's quite possible that retail stores that are big enough and good enough and that have access to local and maybe also online like we do, you might be able to be big enough to make as big a bets as a distributor can. And when that happens, you start to ask the question, well then why distributors, right? And so all of these questions are existing. They don't have answers. They're going to continue to unfold and unravel. I think some distributors are going to succeed and they're going to change things. They're going to change the way they're doing business. I think they must. Some distributors are not. I think we have too many distributors for the number of retail stores and the number of products coming out and the ability to actually achieve volume in any meaningful way to get the products that you need to sell to those retailers.
If there was a distributor willing to make big bets and also capable of betting on the right horses most of the time,
yep,
I think they would. Obviously, now, if there was a distributor right now who had Wingspan,
yep,
even at 70% of cost, they would sell out.
If I'm a distributor right now and I haven't gotten Jamie on the phone and said, I want to do whatever it takes to get 10,000 copies of every Stonemaier game on release, then I'm going to fail. Because it's going to take that level of inspiration, if you will, or work. I mean, you're going to have to get in there and get it done, sure, right? That is the next step. And distributors that take that route are going to do well. I think distributors that are going to continue, holding their hands out and hoping that they get the numbers they ask for are not going to work. And you got to understand, this is all relationships. I mean, it's about the relationship between you and you as the value adder and value creator and the kind of value additions throughout that chain. And you guys all have to have a conversation together.
I also think, again, the chain is fine. But it's not like this moment that you're trying to capture, right? Where you get 40 copies of Wingspan when it's the unbelievably hot game.
When you don't have to sell it.
You're never going to get that.
Right.
You're going to get the 1 to 3 copies of a game, and for 90% of the board games that are coming out, you're going to be just fine, and you can do your thing, and as long as you have enough customers coming in. So I think that model's fine, and it will still be there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that when there are these moments where if you were 10 years ago a publisher and you created all this demand for a game and you saw all these retailers getting half of the, literally, I mean, if you get a 50% discount, you're making as much as the publisher and the distributor combined to sell that game. And part of that is because your scale should be a lot smaller.
Sure.
You're selling to 20 local customers instead of the fact the distributor could sell to 5,000 stores.
Right.
And the publisher can sell in mass volume as well. But just it's this moment where like you want to cash in on the value other people created.
The moment.
This feeling of it, really, it's entitlement. It's like you believe that you are owed this because of the value you're adding to the chain. Mm-hmm. And essentially publishers are just figuring out a way around that.
Or they're genuinely asking the question, how much value are you providing? And those questions have to be asked for retail to get better. This is a necessary adjustment, I think, to dramatically shift the direction that this industry is going, because we're getting out of the phase that was, we are the place where your products can get sold, period. And moving into, just as everyone in the industry has done, from washing machines to car tires, right? I can go to Goodyear.com and buy my tires now. I don't need the tire shop. I can go to Maytag.com and buy the washing machine. There's a reason the Home Depots and the Lowe's popped up and the local, hardware store is no longer, right? There are obvious reasons this is happening, and we're not insulated from it.
Yeah.
It's physical products being shipped through a supply chain. It's the exact same thing. The only difference is that you actually need a place to do this, right? I can go put the tires on my car wherever. I can put a washing machine in my house, but I have to go where there's other people to play tabletop games. And retailers need to cash in on that strength, and they need to use it as a lever to get the benefit that they want. That's their value, and we have to fall into that. So are we going to do that in the next 5 years, Zach?
Let's actually get to the meat of this. So I think it's important for me to talk about, we've been talking a lot here about the various changes we kind of suspect that are required in the industry, but to understand where I kind of see us fitting in the next decade, into tabletop, there's a handful of things that I think are going to happen in tabletop, right? So the first thing that I fundamentally believe in is that tabletop games are going to keep growing aggressively. They've been growing since we got involved 12 years ago officially as a company. They've been growing since I was a kid when I was 10. And that is not a trend I expect will go differently. And there's a lot of things behind this. Even the fact that a game like Wingspan can succeed 15 years ago, that would have been a disaster. That game would not have been successful. So the variety and the quality of games, the type of games that are being offered, and the diversity is extremely high. I think that there are a lot of retailers out there who are getting really good, and they're evolving and they're pushing things forward in a bunch of different ways. I think that there's publishers, same thing. And the reality is that tabletop games are incredible at getting people together, letting them have a good time, and helping them connect over something. And so I think there's going to be, and it's a snowball in my opinion, right? It's not a linear growth, it's kind of exponential.
And I think we both agree that there's going to be consistently a growing need for avenues of human connection that are physical and face-to-face.
Sure.
Right? Like as digital pulls more and more away, I think we will see a desire and a return to physical spaces and human interaction in the physical.
Yeah, and I think particularly in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see the value of moving physical goods kind of hit rock bottom.
We just saw Amazon's going to 1 day.
It's crazy town.
I mean, pretty soon they're just going to be in my house producing whatever it is that I say.
Well, pretty soon they'll just start delivering things before you've said you wanted them.
Yeah.
Because they understand your brain.
Because they're listening to all my conversations in the house.
They definitely are. So I think when I really position those two together, which is if you actually do have immense growth, and the third element to me is that I think right now they're 5 or 10 years from now, right? Like if we'd gone back 10 years, it's like I would have still said, hey, this industry is going to grow a lot. That was kind of what we were. It's like if we do this better, we'll help it grow, but we also think it's going to grow in general. But I think when you have the value of the physical goods hitting, because that's kind of the end of a model to me, like the old school from the 70s, 80s, 90s model of retail, paired with growth, I think in the next decade, there's going to be a lot of very big winners and very big losers. I think
Can we be the first?
Big winner?
Yeah.
Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Let's do this. But it is the kind of thing like we've been talking about a lot. But just looking at it, one thing for me that we're specifically going to hopefully be able to do, right, is solve how we do local retail.
Yeah.
And it's a smaller thing that we're talking about in terms of the covenant sphere. But the reality of finding a way to create a retail environment that offers enough value to be significant in the industry that doesn't revolve around selling goods. Selling goods is great. Your retail, that's inherently what retail means, is selling the goods to customers kind of a thing. So, but there is this element of, the truth is that the value that I think our store creates at least is very little to do with the movement of goods. It's way more in the play space, the environment, the education that we can offer from our staff in store, the demo copies that we can offer available, the community building that we can do, the onboarding we can help players with, and all that kind of stuff. And the challenge for us right now is figuring out, and was it last episode that we talked local, or was it 2 episodes ago? It was 2.
I think it was 2. Yeah.
We talked about switching gears and kind of refocusing, because all that stuff you typically do. A lot of retailers are set up where they do that and then they charge MSRP on products, and the exchange is like, well, you buy your products from us and they're a little more expensive than they are online, but you do that so that we'll do all this other stuff.
Yep.
And so connecting the dot on, can you actually just monetize and actually make it economical to do the other stuff, like the stuff that players actually find valuable we're doing? How do we independently, because that's where, like with Wingspan, right? If the model wasn't surrounding the actual movement of that box to do all the other stuff that we're doing, it wouldn't be a problem.
Right.
It's like, oh, we got 3 copies of this game and we're just going to make them available to use in store.
Right.
Because that's an exciting thing that we can offer that fits into whatever it is our model is to make this this kind of click around. But I think that's where there's a huge potential for some distributors to win big, for retailers to figure this out and win big. Publishers, I think there's going to be a there's too many games being made right now.
Yeah.
And someone's going to break through the noise. And I think that's when I look at our role, right, it's heavy focus on cutting through the noise and helping new people get involved in this. Because if you were a new player walking into this industry, it is bizarre.
Right.
I think it's just overwhelming to deal with. Even the idea right now of, if you saw Wingspan somewhere and you wanted to buy it, what you have to go through. I'm going to pre-order it and I might not get it actually.
Which you probably don't even know at the time, right? I mean,
just
most
find
people
out
are
later.
reading a New York Times article, they're going to go try to find it on Amazon. They don't know about the cool stuffs and the miniature markets and the local retail stores and gaming and board gaming and all that. They have no idea. It's just it's a product. I'll just go where I normally look and try to find it.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, though, I think it's the reality of a number of things are going to have to shift in the industry for the growth to happen that I expect to happen. And I expect people to figure out how to make that happen. And, it's hard to say exactly what our role in that will be. But I know it's going to be focused on continuing. We recently finished a huge website rebuild project and all that to make it even easier just to interact with us.
Yeah.
But a supreme focus on making it as accessible as possible for people to get into this hobby, because there's going to be a lot of them.
Yes.
Like, I think way more people in 10 years will be actively playing games than they are right now. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that I think, a perspective that needs to shift in the industry, which is so much of what's happening is we have, this pool of 100 players, and we're kind of tossing them around in between games and stores and locations and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to add 1,000 players over the next decade, right? So it's like 10 to 1.
Just here locally.
Well, like if 100 players represents all of the
as a ratio.
Community,
okay.
Yeah, it's 500 or 1,000 getting added over the next decade. And so what that means, though, is that, and it's going to be people that don't understand the status quo or the previous system. So it is going to be a lot of people that naturally look on Amazon or that look on, go to Target to buy something. And then the question mark is, how do you get someone to go from, and this is problems I'm foreseeing and hoping we can solve, how do you get someone to go from playing Wingspan at the kitchen table to playing either that game or other games with other people, right? And start building these communities and connecting people. Because the most powerful thing, and I think why at least I'm so fascinated by tabletop, is the result of these communities and what happens when you're involved in one. And you just, I see it all the time. In
Well,
the
we've
local
been
community.
there so many times.
Yeah.
In the communities, various games, various people moving to different games together, and all. It's a long term, and it's a very it's a pretty intimate relationship that you form over the years. It's rare that you have something that is so universally accessible to people that is also pretty easy to stay engaged over time. Because examples I have, I got to play volleyball for the first time in a long time last night.
Picture
which
that.
is I'm beginning to understand is probably in my top 3 of like self actualizing and affirming experiences that I can have. I absolutely I love it more than almost anything in my life. So when I have that experience, I'm like, oh my gosh, why have I not been doing this, right? But for me, like with volleyball, that goes away in the winter. And if I hurt my leg, I can't play anymore. And maybe I can't jump as high, in a couple of years. And
Just get older.
onward and upward. And that's not to say that I won't, do my best. But this is a hobby that is available pretty much your entire life, regardless of a vast number of circumstances that you might find yourself in. And it allows you to stay connected, So if you stay connected for 20 to 30 to 40 years, which a lot of you listening probably have, like there's a number of people out here listening right now that have been playing games maybe with the same people, or at least 1 or 2 of the same people for 20 to 30 years now, the relationships over that, I just don't know. It's hard to imagine something else giving you that kind of constant, spontaneous exposure to these people in a non-threatening and non-stressful environment that doesn't really ask anything of you except to get together and have a good time. And you got to capitalize on that, right? This is the moment for tabletop because we're seeing everything go very disparate, and we're seeing everything pulling away from what I would consider the authentic human experience, if you will. And now is our time to fill in that vacuum and say, this is it. Like, this is what you need to be doing. And so on that note, like coming to your point, adding a little bit where I can, is I think the question that everybody should be asking in this industry, and the question that we're asking constantly, what are the problems and what is the value that we can be adding? And so like you said, to your point, we don't think products being sold locally or physically, read the tea leaves, look at other industries, it's not going to be the norm anymore. Now, you can have some product sales of opportunity, as it were, right? But even the Best Buys and whatnot are moving into like tech support and Geek Squad stuff and trying to make it an experiential shopping. And you don't know the camera you need, we can help you. There are ways that retailers can adapt to that. But if somebody knows what they want, it's over for you, right? And that's the problem with Wingspan. People coming in knowing what they want, other online retailers know how to serve that need in the best way possible. So you're not going to win that. And so on that note, I think we shift away locally from product sales as the main revenue driver, which we've been in the process of doing for many years now, really. And then alternatively, we'll look to catch some of that online. Because like if all these products are going to be moving through online, we're going to try to solve that problem too. And that's a lot of the focus on the subscription model. And how can we solve problems that Amazon can't solve? And so you got to start asking those kinds of questions. So locally, it's like pull products back, not rely on them so much. Online, push the products where they're going to be pushed. Be there, be a part of the conversation, right? Like don't just cede ground, but like fight for it and try to be there as well. And then also when we're looking at content right now is a tremendous amount of value that you can add to this system. Because as you said, what happens when somebody gets the board game and they don't know how to play it? Like look at Rodney with Watch It Played, right? There's value there in teaching people how to play. Look at our learning series. It's all about, can a publisher and or a distributor, depending on who ultimately is going to make the call as to the units that you get, can they look somewhere and clearly see that you are providing a tremendous value to them and to the industry as a whole? And so, I mean, right now, let's be, speaking of Jay and being transparent, let's be transparent, Zach. If we didn't have a YouTube channel and we'd done nothing but started a retail store, we would not be selling Wingspan pre-orders right now.
Like,
there's no, right? We wouldn't have had a conversation with Jamie in St. Louis. He wouldn't know who we were.
Yeah.
so when you think about, well, how can I add value? How can I do better? How can I, win in this space? You've got to get people's attention, and you generally do that by adding as much value as possible. This podcast, for instance, we love doing this. Many people seem to enjoy listening to it, and so there's value there. There's an exchange, and as long as you're doing that and focusing on that, you're going to do well, I think, in the future. You're going to win.
Well, and I think on a little bit of a tangent on that, I totally agree. You have to find
I'm glad
ways
you agree. You agree we should add value.
Okay? We should add value, yeah. So the other part of this, and you kind of hinted at the learning content, right? And I think that's one of the things local stores kind of are doing now, and even have been doing for a while, is that onboarding process. But we grew up, and part of why we are doing it the way we're doing it is when the games I played when I went into a store, they usually didn't care about. And so they couldn't teach me. Mm-hmm. Hopefully someone else was there that played that could teach me. That's how I learned Star Wars TCG.
Yeah.
Andrew brought it to school and taught it to us.
Yeah.
And so on. And so you also see people like Watch It Played, or us with our learning series, or whoever doing the education piece. Mm-hmm. And that's not even a pillar of the local store anymore.
Right.
I can learn how to play Wingspan on my phone on the train to work, or in the evening after my kids go to bed. Mm-hmm. And so that's where, I look at the local environment. It has to leverage the fact that it has a local environment and find a way to make that the model.
Yeah.
Or it will just go away. In the same way that it's not, I look at like the tech industry, and you mentioned Best Buy, and I think it was a great example, where they're struggling because that's the exact problem they're trying to face.
Look at everyone who's failed. I mean, Circuit City, these kinds of bigger retailers. The death of big box stores, right, is every headline in the past 5 years. And there's a reason for that. You have to look at the underlying movements going on, and that's happening, right? It's happening everywhere.
Yeah. And so I think that's when I look at the next decade, right? That's the reality of it. That's what I mean by the big winners and losers, is I think the retail stores that figure that out and figure out how to do that will be very successful.
Yeah.
Because I think there's going to continue being a lot of games made. There's going to be a whole bunch of players that are being made, and they're going to be everywhere. And the people that are in a position to take advantage of that, super successful. Everyone else, it could be a rough ride.
I mean, welcome to any industry, right? So, Cliff's Notes,
also,
if you would.
One thing I want to before we cut out of here on the Cliff's Notes version, the recap, is I would love if one of the things we can achieve in the next decade is to either be a part of or lead the charge on tabletop arriving to the point where we stop asking, what's the best? How do I win the prize? What do I win when I do this? And instead, the natural frame of mind is this fun? Am I enjoying this? Was this valuable and fulfilling to me? And if we can, I would love, and we're making some movement on this locally, and I think even our content as of late has been shifting this direction, but really paying attention to the people that are enjoying this hobby as a hobby. Yeah. I like getting to that point where that's the norm, and not this is the next big tournament and these are the next big prizes and here's the extrinsic rewards.
Intrinsic.
What's the outer reward? And
extrinsic may actually be a word.
I think it's
just
extrinsic.
Never used it.
Yeah. The extrinsic value of this experience, and what is the intrinsic, internal value of this?
Checks out.
Yeah, nailed it. Never tell me the odds. Anyways, I would love, there's philosophically some of those shifts, right? And I think that's what all this boils down to, which is helping the industry focus first on the new people and being welcoming and getting more people involved in this. Because again, if this industry does grow 10 times in the next decade, the amount of things that have to change about the way things are being done is significant. Yeah. And there's tons of opportunity in that.
Yeah. So Cliff's Notes, I'll give you a little bit more tangibles for those who are looking for that. I think focusing on the retail model is something that we're very interested in. We want it to be like nothing you've ever experienced before. And like a good example of looking at kind of atmosphere and experience, I think Brendan does a pretty good job with this down at Night Watch in San Antonio. They do a really good job, and they're exploring a model that is come in and essentially be a part of a medieval castle, right? You got big tables, you got big wolf
that is on my bucket
walking
list.
Around, and that's probably going to work, right? But these are the kinds of things where you can start shifting the model and asking the question, how can I do this better? I think we just want an incredible, like a noteworthy space. The kind of place where you visit and you can't help but talk about it and tell your friends and insist that anybody who's within 200 miles of Tulsa go here. It's a landmark. It's where you want to be, right? So that's the first thing. And the value there then would be like, imagine the number of new people that we can get involved in the hobby, and then imagine the number of people who are on the outside, like the publishers and or distributors, who are saying, oh, wow, whenever Covenant is promoting something or stocking something at their store level, and they have all these new people coming in, it's selling a lot more because these new people are coming in, learning the game there and buying it. So naturally, maybe they're more of a preferred client in the future, right? Those kinds of exchanges. Online, I think we want to continue to push the automatic, seamless, making it easy to stay up with anything that's expandable. That's a huge priority. It's still a pain point for a vast number of people. And it also increases engagement with the games themselves. So like if I can very easily get expansions for a game like Wingspan, I'm probably going to keep playing Wingspan longer than if I have to go track them down at some weird website or at a retail store that doesn't exist.
And the easier that is, the longer, because I see it, people that come week to week to these meetups for Destiny, as an example, one of the communities I'm in, keeping people engaged with that, super valuable. So giving people a reason to get back to the table, right, is one of the best things possible. I'm just picturing the number of people that automatically get the Wingspan expansion, and then, let's get together and play this thing. It's like that moment.
It gives you the moment. It gives you the moment, and that's what you need, really. Yeah. You need the moment to have an excuse to get together. And then on the content side, we're going heavy into the...
It's about to get crazy.
We're here to have a good time with tabletop games. We're not here to find the best of the best in terms of decks and cards and ships and lists, and here's the best of this pack and the best of that pack. It's about enjoying this thing.
Having a good time.
And we've got a new show that we're kind of working on right now that should be happening relatively soon, and we're kind of ironing that out. I think the podcast is more or less kind of sticking where it is right now. I think we like taking deep dives into kind of industry-specific things, or like hot items of news, or what we're doing here at Covenant, and that'll continue to evolve. And we're still looking at different ways we might use the live streaming as a platform. So those kind of three pillars of content that we're looking at right now, and that's just a constant refining and brainstorming process, and consistently asking, how can we make a better learning series? How can we teach people these games better? Which games should we be teaching? How can we do a better, kind of provide a show that's a better reflection of the realities of having fun playing games versus looking at the ESPN that we started with of like, I'm going to be a pro, player of Catan. So kind of flipping the script on that. And then how can we continue to have kind of an open line with the community that's kind of gathered here through the podcast to continually kind of keep everybody up to date and keep sharing perspectives and keep this kind of ongoing permanent brainstorming session going between the camera and what we're doing here. And so kind of all those things taken together is kind of a blueprint for how we see the next 5 years going. So don't copy us. Or we'll be very disappointed.
Or try, and if you learn anything, leave a comment. We'd love to share in your experience.
Make us better, please. Shall we get to the question, Zach?
Yeah, let's do it. You want me to read this?
Yeah. How about the hashtag #AskCovenant? This is where these come from. Actually, this one didn't. I think we just pulled it right from the comments. We shouldn't tell anybody that because you'll stop using the hashtag, which is way harder for us. But please use that hashtag #AskCovenant. That is what we search whenever we're looking for questions to feature on the show. And you can do that on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, probably Instagram as well, although it's not really what Instagram is for.
You could do a little ask question video on Instagram and then hashtag it. All right, so the question comes from Andy Hutchinson. To answer, without answering, Zach's question about publisher responsibility. This is last week asking, what's the responsibility of a publisher to a retailer? Andy says, I have to say, I think the focus is too narrow. I think the question ideally should be, what responsibilities do the publisher, distributor, store, and customer have toward each other? In all these conversations, the last category seems to get left out a lot. I assume it means the customer. Hearing lots of comments about 3-tier system. Many people should be using the term 4-tiered system, as 3 seems to let the customers off the hook and their responsibilities. And yeah, I get no one wants to offend customers, but until the industry gets to Amazon levels, the customer base has to share some of the burden here. You want pre-order guarantees, then you cough up the money when you order. Besides, I'm not making buying decisions on what I expect my disposable income to be 6 months down the line. I'm making it in the here and then with that in mind. Note, this is speaking from a customer point of view. I don't know enough about the industry mechanics to give a meaningful answer to Zach's question. There are, I presume, store forums for that question where he would get answers from people who know what they're talking about. If the publishers had any sense, that would be the question they're asking distributors and stores, and for all I know, they did at Gamma. I did think about writing a lot more as if this wasn't enough already, but it's a lazy Saturday morning, and Anno 1800 is calling to me.
That's a good Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember the customer has a role, but I don't know that the customer is unwilling to play it.
Yeah. Well, this is the funny thing here is like saying until the industry gets to Amazon levels, it's like the industry is on Amazon, right? That's a reality that we can't. If you're sticking your head in the sand about that, then you are losing right now. Like you are not going to do well in the next 10 years because it's not going to get any better. And the reason that's happening is because Amazon has a value proposition to the customer and to the publisher. And so welcome to the world, right? This is how markets typically exist. So the role of the customer in all of this is, in any other industry, what is the role of the customer?
To buy things.
Be interested in the goods and make a purchase?
Yeah, but like if an iPhone fails, no one's like, it was the customer's fault.
Right. Like they should have pre-ordered more units and we would have made more iPhones kind of thing, right?
But this is also, the situation of, in the iPhone game, you order it, and when you order it, you know how long it's going to take to get here. Mm-hmm. And companies like Apple or Samsung are making bets on how much to print, and sometimes they run out.
Yep.
And when they run out, that's just how it goes.
And the only reason that Apple provides those estimates is because they think that more people will pre-order the product. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, right? So if board game publishers or distributors think that providing a concrete timeline is going to get more pre-orders for them, then they should do that, right? And that's just the way that it goes. So if you're willing to adapt to this situation and actually look at how can we best serve the customer, and for the distributor that's asking how can we best serve the retailer, and the retailer should be asking how can we best serve the customer. As long as everybody's talking on that way, like I think everything's going to get better, and the people who are communicating like that are going to do well. But if you're not asking those questions at all those levels, right, it's not the customer's responsibility to decide what games they want and then figure out what the most effective way to pre-order those games are, and then hope that they get those pre-orders satisfied. And then when they don't, to not be upset about it, because that's just the way it works, right? That's kind of ludicrous. The customer's role is to give you the money for the good, and your role then becomes to deliver that good.
Sure.
And if you can't do that side of the equation, I don't think that's the customer's fault at all. Now, if getting pre-order money up front allows you to take less risk and maybe put in a bigger order, which is more likely to get guaranteed at fulfillment, sure, that's a decision you can make as a business, and we make that decision a lot. Guaranteeing pre-orders, like you have to put money down. But if there were a business that didn't require money down at all and they could still pull it off, they would do better.
Sure. I also think on the customer level, right, their maybe core responsibility, right, is to pick and choose who and where they buy from. And so if you do actually get a lot of value out of your local store, right, as an example, you maybe in some way make transactions there. It doesn't have to necessarily be a product.
You should understand the realities of commerce in that way.
The better retailers get at providing you things that you can pay for, that you actually want to pay for, and that aren't overpriced on the kind of thing, the better that's going to go. But the same with the publishers you're buying games from, right? That's a very important decision, just in terms of who you're voting for, kind of a thing. But outside that, what else is a customer supposed to do?
I don't know.
I don't know that there's much there. So
I don't know. Yeah, I think asking for understanding is kind of not talking specifically about the problem. It's like it's on all of us to solve the problem that the customer's having right now.
That is what we're in the business of doing, right? Yeah, I think that's what I have a question to ask.
Yeah, let's kick it off. Final question.
Question for me, if you would leave this in the comments on the YouTube video, it would be much appreciated. I would love to know, based on everything that you just heard us talk about, what is
fired up today.
You can feel it. I'm also just warm. I don't know what's going on. But
just an old man.
What is it in the next 5 to 10 years? What things would you be most excited to see Covenant do, or what is it you think we should be doing that maybe we didn't mention here?
Yeah, right to the consumer. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you guys so much for watching and for a great 100 episodes. We appreciate you more than we can adequately explain, and we talk about it often, not in front of the camera. So thank you very much. This is a life that we are so happy to be living, I gotta tell you. Until next time, keep playing.